Okay, so you may have noticed in the past I've done a few videos in which I look at a video game franchise and I look at the approaches that a producer should take in order to make a really good and accurate adaptation. Now in this video I'm going to look at the Legacy of Kain series and the approaches that a producer should make in order to make a really faithful adaptation. Now the Legacy of Kain series started off with Blood Omen, which was released in 1995, and of course the final game in this series was the Legacy of Kain Defiance, released in 2005. Now there was rumours that Ewan Boyle, of all people, wanted to make this into a movie, and thankfully that never happened, because that would have been the worst disaster of all time. Now the Legacy of Kain was a wonderful gaming franchise. It had a wonderful lore to it, some great character designs, and a really interesting and compelling storyline. And it's amazing that a shit heap series like Twilight was made over this. I understand why Twilight was made, because, well, Twilight was more a recent book series compared to the likes of the Legacy of Kain series. And of course the producers, they really played into the fact that they have a younger audience and they're going to love this cute little love triangle storyline with vampires and werewolves and a high school girl. Of course they were going to play into that. And I myself, I've only watched the first Twilight, and honestly that was all I needed, because I could not stomach any more of the later sequels. I watched all the honest trailers of it, and I've watched the CinemaSin videos on it, so I have an understanding of how the story flows. So I know exactly how the first film flowed and how the final film flowed. Honestly, I've got to say is that it's just a disaster all the way through. Stephenie Meyers is truly the vampire killer, and all this woman needed was a laptop and a keyboard to truly destroy modern vampires. Like, seriously, these vampires, they don't even drink human blood. Like, seriously, do they actually count calories or something like that? Is there too much calories in human blood? Like, the vampires are known for being just evil creatures, and yet in the first film we see them playing baseball in the forest. Like, come on, like, seriously, they've made vampires the most lamest creatures ever. And the idea of vampires being exposed to sunlight, which kills them in most vampire lore, but in this case, no. In this case, if they're exposed to sunlight, they sparkle and shine. In other words, they fear that they'll produce too much lens flare for the human eyes in a world in which J.J. Abrams is God. And that's all I'm going to say about this Twilight franchise. Well, no, I'm not actually. I'm going to have to mention about Edward Cullen, probably the most unintentional, creepiest vampire in cinematic history. So he's over 100 years old, and he looks about 17 or 18. So he decides to be a high school kid for the rest of his life, so he can creep on high school girls. I mean, that is literally the most creepiest vampire in all of cinematic history. And then of course there's Jacob, topless werewolf guy, and of course they're in love with Belle, the least interesting female protagonist ever seen in cinematic history. Seriously, guys, she's a shovel face. Okay, that's just my rant about Twilight. Time to go back to the topic of this video. And the topic of this video is bringing the Legacy of Kain to a live action experience. And I'm gonna first say that I'm not gonna talk about the lore of this of the video games, because I feel like there is videos online that could really do a better job than I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide a clickable link for you guys to click on the Legacy of Kain lore, so you can get an understanding of the game series. What I am going to do now is I'm going to look into ways that they can approach a Legacy of Kain movie. Okay, so first off, I'm going to have to say that they're going to have to remaster the actual gaming franchise. I mean, they're going to have to bring back their older audience, and they're going to have to bring back a whole new audience. So in order to do that, they're going to have to remaster these games for the PS4, the new generation of consoles. Because if they didn't do that, the movie would have to be incredibly accurate to please the older generation that actually play these games when they were first released. A lot of the newer audience, they wouldn't be familiar with. But by remastering this franchise, they can actually get a feel for what the game is, and they can get an understanding for the characters and the story, and they'll really fall in love with it. If it does become a live action adaptation, they'll actually go out and see it. So what they have to do is really create a fan base, really bring back that fan base that was kind of lost over the years. Of course, I do feel that they may have to rebuild Blood Omen from the very start, because that game was released in 95, and gamers these days, I don't think they would appreciate the gameplay style of that game. I think because Blood Omen had a kind of old school Zelda style gameplay, and I don't know if that would work for modern day gamers. By remastering this franchise, you're going to build an audience for it. So once there's an audience, people will of course see this film, and of course they'll be able to make a budget back, and of course they'll be able to make further installments. So moving on to the next point, the next approach that they should go for. I think they should make more than just a trilogy. There is 5 games in the series. There's Blood Omen, there is Soul Reaver, there is Soul Reaver 2, there's Blood Omen 2, and of course there's the Legacy of Kain Defiance. That's a lot of material to cover within 3 movies, and I think they should definitely expand on that. They should definitely do more than 5 movies. I actually think they should do 6 movies. I think they should do a movie set before the events of Blood Omen, and just do a story based on Nosgoth itself, the history, the lore of it, and in that way the writers can actually really get used to the style of the universe, so that they can actually really build upon this world, and they can really familiar themselves with this world as well. So by the time they actually introduce major players, they already feel at home. So this will really benefit the viewers, and it will really benefit the writers, as they can really explore this gaming lore. My second point that they should do is, I think they should definitely go for practical effects. I think a lot of the things in this game they can be done with practical effects. A lot of the vampire type of vampires, it can all be achieved with practical effects. There might be need to apply some sort of CGI creatures, because in the Soul Reaver, Raziel's brothers, they do change into more monstrous type creatures, and of course that will require CGI. But I think what they should do is go as practical as possible, really go proper old school with this. And I really think they should go for real sets. Nosgoth is just a wonderful location, and it was just glorious to look at, especially the Nosgoth that we've seen in Soul Reaver. It had a wonderful, almost cathedral style look to it. It had this wonderful, almost European feel to it. It felt, raw, gritty, just damp. It just had this wonderful texture to it, and I think that would really fit in great for a cinematic experience if this was all done with as much sets as possible, rather than a green screen experience. Okay, so another point I'm going to make is that because this franchise hasn't been around for so long, I think that what the producers should do is to work with a more smaller, more modest budget. And in that sense, the filmmakers and the writers will actually have a lot more control over the actual project. A lot of the cases when the film has a bigger budget, the producers will definitely have a bit more control over the directors and writers. They'll want to make sure that this film will make as much profit as possible, and they're going to be watching it in like a hawk. They'll want to make a film that will appeal to not just the fans, but to appeal to everyone. So if the film has a smaller budget, that means that while some things will be kind of lost because they don't have the budget, they will have a sense of being able to just create a film that will really feel closer to the actual games, and really will appeal to more of a niche audience, and that will help it. And also with a lower budget, they can also do an R rating on it. Often cases with a bigger budget movie, they'll often have to go for a PG-13 rating, because producers fear that they won't get enough of an audience with a higher, harsher rating. So if you look at other films, like Solomon Kane had a budget of 40 million, and while it didn't make its budget back, it did look fantastic. Effects looked really good. There was really nice practical effects. there were some pretty impressive CGI creatures, and it looked overall great. And then of course there was Deadpool, which was released this year as well, and that film did look great as well. I know there were some limitations with the action scenes, but it was still a wonderful film, and some of the CGI in that film was some of the best you'll ever see. It was better than those bigger films. I mean, often cases with films with a budget between 100 to maybe even 200 million, CGI can still look pretty bad, but Deadpool had a budget that was not even close to 100 million, but Colossus in that film looked absolutely incredible. With a smaller budget, there's more of a chance that they will succeed in terms of profit, and if it succeeds more in profit, they can actually make a bigger franchise, they can expand on it, and it means they can actually make more films. I'm going to talk about a writer and a director who can understand Shakespeare. And I know this sounds weird when I say this, but the Legacy of Kain always kind of had this almost near Shakespearean feel to it. And in terms of its writing, in terms of its team itself. And the writer and director really need to kind of have this understanding for it. It's not this overly stylish type franchise. It's nothing like Underworld or Resident Evil. It's really a deeper franchise. It's a story about betrayal and a story about corruption, and it's really interesting in that sense. They really approach it as more of a drama rather than a big action epic. First off, the writer needs to understand the lore of the characters. They need to understand the lore of Nosgoth. They need to understand the motivation that drives each character and be absolutely fearless, because in one sense you're going to be dealing with a lot of darker characters and characters that aren't human, and they're gonna have to make these characters relatable. So that is quite a challenge. But the biggest challenge for the writer of this is to make sure the dialogue is elegant and almost poetic, because this was key to the enjoyment of the Legacy of Kain series. It was just the fact that the dialogue was written in such a unique fashion, a fashion that has kind of become lost. So in terms of writers, I think someone like Brian Fuller, he worked on Hannibal, and I've mentioned that the Hannibal TV show quite a few times in the past, but each character in that show, they almost spoke in this poetic type way, and it was just incredible. And I really think someone like him should be involved actually as a writer on this. I think Michael Leslie, who was involved with Macbeth, last year's Macbeth, would also be great for this as well. Someone who can understand that type of writing. I think someone with a playwright background would really suit this type of narrative. And in terms of directors, I think Kenneth Brackett would be a perfect director for this. He's just a wonderful director. He knows Shakespeare really well, and he's done big budget films, and he's done kind of smaller budget films, and he's also done quite a lot of Shakespeare adaptations, and I think he would be great for this. I also think Justin Kurzel, who done Macbeth and this year's Assassin's Creed, would also be a great director for this, because I loved his adaptation of Macbeth. I thought it was wonderfully stylish. And once again, that film had quite a small budget. I know the budget was 20 million, and it had quite a lot of star power to it, and it had some wonderful designs to it, and of course wonderful performances, and it had an incredible style to it. And of course he had a great understanding for the team of Macbeth. He's also working on Assassin's Creed, and from what I've seen from the trailer, what I've heard from the production, this is going to be an incredibly accurate video game adaptation, and I think if he can apply that to the Legacy of Kain, then we could be in for an incredible video game movie. Okay, so moving on from that, I want to look at my final point for this, and my final point for this is I think they should go for talented actors, kind of even unknownish actors that may have appeared on TV shows, actors that aren't completely A-listers. I think they should focus on using the budget for the actual world of it rather than going for real heavy hitters. I mean, Hollywood heavy hitters. I think Lee Pace, who featured in the Hobbit movies, I think he would be wonderful as the role of Kain. I think his performance in the Hobbit, it just absolutely nailed that kind of all the essence that is Kain. He had this kind of arrogance about him. He kind of had this rootlessness about him, and he kind of had this kind of air of just pure kind of even this little bit of evil to him. And I think he'd be absolutely perfect for Kain. I think he'd be great for playing a younger Kain seen in Blood Omen and Blood Omen 2. But I think with under heavy makeup, he could easily play kind of an older Kain that we've seen in Soul Reaver and Soul Reaver 2, and of course the Legacy of Kain Defiance. I also think Ben Barnes would be great for Raziel. Ben Barnes is a great actor, and he's got a resemblance to Raziel before he was distorted by the abyss, and I think he'd be a great actor for the role of Raziel. This is just my opinion on how a producer should approach this project, and I'd like to hear your opinion on this. I'm just wondering, is there any Legacy of Kain gamers out there, people that are familiar with this franchise? What is your favorite game in the Legacy of Kain franchise? Really voice your opinion and tell me what you think they should do for the Legacy of Kain movie. And do you actually want a Legacy of Kain movie? And I'm just going to leave it at that. Thanks for watching, and like this video. Subscribe if you like what you see. Thanks for watching once again.